Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. In this video I'm going to take you through the process of how to make the yard jack pattern, a rough cut sewing pattern. It is skill level 3 out of 5 and it looks like this. So the way this tutorial is going to work is these garments are made using my sewing pattern. So obviously you're going to need the sewing pattern to be able to join in with this tutorial. I'm going to take you through the process of how the patterns work quickly, and then I'm going to show you the example of the pattern itself once it's tiled. I'm going to show you how this right here does the same thing as the A0 sheet right here. And then we're going to get to cutting out fabric. I'll show you the fabric choices I've used and have available for this project. And then we'll get into a full visual tutorial where I'm going to take you through every step of the process of how to build this jacket. Now, some of the previous patterns on this YouTube channel have been modular courses which take you through multiple different routes of the same pattern, and they have multiple PDFs involved. Now this pattern right here is different. It's not a modular course. However, it is part 1 of a 5-part series. You probably already saw this if you follow me on Instagram, or you may have purchased the full 5-piece set. Essentially, this is a workwear series. There is a dungarees, a coveralls, the yard jacket itself, the yard carpenters which match, which are a pair of trousers, and then the last pattern is an apron. And this is a 5-pattern piece series as the workwear collection. We're going to be focusing in on the yard jacket today. If you're interested in finding the tutorials for the other workwear patterns, then you can also find all of that on my YouTube channel, or you can head to the product on my website and navigate into the description and find what you're looking for. Let's jump into the pattern. So this right here is the yard jacket. It looks like this photo right here. It is based off the Detroit style workwear jacket. It's got the 2 welted pockets on the sort of easy access at the bottom of the jacket. It's got the zip welted pocket at the chest, and then it's got the nice collar at the top, which we may do in corduroy or another fabric just to sort of complement. You can do the same later on. Anyway, this is the pattern. This is the A4 version. If you're downloading the pattern as a digital file option on the website, then you're going to receive the A4, which is good for pretty much all the world, but then the US letter is based for places like North America, Canada, Mexico. They all use sort of a US letter format, so make sure to check the format before you print. Anyway, this is the A4. You're going to get the US letter also if you're in that region. And then you also get the A0, which I'm going to show you in a minute. This right here is a skill level 3 out of 5. If you're interested in the skill levels and a full breakdown of, like, you know, what a skill level 3 represents in the sort of realm of 1 to 5, then you can head to the website, click on the start page, and then figure out your skill level and choose, you know, the right pattern for you, or whether you think this one is, you know, you're ready to jump into this pattern. Then you have the 2x2 inch square. I always recommend that if people are having sizing issues with the pattern, the reason we put the 2x2 inch square on the main cover page of the pattern is so you can obviously just print out the first page of the pattern, make sure you get that 2-inch perfect like it is right there, and then you can print out the rest of the sheets of the pattern. So this pattern is graded over quite a few sizes. So if you're a small, medium, large, XL, double XL, and that one right there should say triple XL, it will be in triple XL too. It's graded across all them sizes. I'll show you where we have our measurement guides in a minute. If we open this pattern, you can see that this pattern, as I said, is part of a workwear series, and you have all the different patterns in skill level order down here. Shows you where you are on the system. So you have the field apron, the carpenters, the jacket that we're doing right now, the service coveralls, and then the service dungarees. And these all function as a workwear series. Collect them all type thing. You can bundle and buy them all at once, whatever works for you. You have a contents page, and then we get to the materials, the outer sort of fabric choices that you can pick from, the collar, the lining choices, the hardware, the rivets, the universal hardware guide, so it goes through other things that you can choose to add. And this sort of stuff mainly sort of represents what fabrics you're going to need for all of the different projects. So this sort of covers all the rivets and the sort of buckles for the dungarees, but you know, you can sort of pick and choose. This is kind of like a reference to what sort of stuff you could be buying for the project. And then that first page we showed you with the material shows you exactly how much fabric you're going to need for your outer shell and how much fabric you're going to need right here for your lining. Make sure to follow this, but I always recommend that you're going to need more fabric than you expect. So buy more fabric than you need. Don't necessarily use this as a guideline, just buy loads of fabric and then work it out from there. I always recommend about 2.5 meters for outer shell on a fabric which is around 150 centimeters width is always perfect. Anyway, that is your materials and hardware. This will be on the pattern, so you can go back and read it. You wouldn't need this if you didn't have the pattern. You have your print and assembly guide. So this pattern right here is quite a lot of pages. So as you can see, you have your alphabetical order going along horizontally, and then you have your numerical system going down vertically. And this kind of bit of text under here explains that. If you are stuck, there's a whole dedicated page under the help sort of tab on our website, and it breaks down exactly how to stick all the pages together. But essentially what you're doing is, with this pattern right here, this A4 version is more accessible for you to print at home, and you're basically just trying to aim to get this over here. So you're basically tiling all of these pages together and you're aiming to get it as your full printout, which looks something like this over here. And obviously this is a visual representation of what it will look like when it's all stuck together. Again, a little stick guide, a little cutting guide, and then you have your pattern basics. So this is really important to go over. This applies to all of our sewing patterns within Roughcut. Everything is sewn at a 1/4 seam allowance, which is approximately 6 millimeters, unless stated. Unless stated basically means like hems of pockets, or it means just finishing the sleeve hems and just bits where you'd have a double fold or bits where you do a flat fell seam. There is going to be a few parts of that in this tutorial, but I'm basically going to break down exactly how to do that when we get to that part of the stage. Don't add any seam allowance when cutting, it's already added. So all of this information is on the website, very in depth, but it says it on this pattern, expecting you to have read the website and all the information on the website. Don't add any seam allowance to the patterns because we've already added a 1/4 seam allowance to all of our patterns. Essentially, if you choose to add any more seam allowance, account the fact that we've already added a 1/4. So if you like sewing at a 3/8, you would add 1/4 and then add the rest and then go from there. But if you don't understand any of this, then just cut directly on the line. So if you have your sewing pattern, I'll show you this in a minute, you're basically not adding any more sort of extra for when you're cutting out your fabric or when you're cutting out the pattern itself. Anyway, just little things like right sides together, which we'll explain in a minute. These aren't too important. At the bottom, most projects have a sort of 2 to 3 millimeter sort of stitch length, but you don't need to worry about that. Now here is measurements. These are your extra small all the way up to triple XL. So we do have extra small. I need to update the front of the pattern, but it's extra small all the way up to triple XL. And this jacket has a little visual representation of how to take these sizes. And these sizes you see are your final garment sizes. So make sure that you're measuring an old existing garment and not your body measurements, because your sizing might come out slightly, wrong if you're not measuring an old garment. These are final garment measurements, not body measurements. And I'll let you go from there if you're interested in taking your sizes. There is also a file within the download which explains how to take the sizes. Finally, there is a little pattern icon glossary, and this basically goes over little things like cut to mirrored, which I'm going to explain in a minute. But if you don't sort of know any of this, then you can sort of read into the pattern glossary and get a little understanding of how these patterns work. Then you're tiling. So from this point onwards, the rest of the pattern, you pretty much tile these pages together and you achieve something just like this, which is already pre-cut out, ready for us. We don't have to do any tiling. This is the A0 sheet. And now I'm going to fully explain this. So this right here is the A0 sheet. Essentially, I print this off in the studio, and this pattern, as I said, has a few different pages, which still means that it is quite a lot of A0 to sort of work with. Even though this is large format paper, there is still quite a lot of pieces to this pattern. It's graded across quite a few sizes, and Geo does his best to sort of fit all the pattern pieces on the A0 size paper before, so we can make the most of the paper. But it is still like 5 pages. I'm going to break down this pattern, but before I break down this pattern, I just wanted to say, you just saw me explain the digital A4 file and the tiling system. And this right here is the A0, as I've already shown you, but we print these off in-house, and if you choose the printed and shipped option, this will get directly basically printed in the studio, and then every Friday I batch print and send these out to the customers. So essentially you can bypass all of the tiling of the pages and just get one of these directly shipped to your door, and then from there you can just cut your desired size and get going with the sewing project. It is a little bit of a more sort of higher cost system, but it is way more worth it, and a lot of people recommend doing it this way because the tiling of the pages can be a little bit tricky if it's the first time you're doing it. I only just invested in the A0 printer, but it is a massive time saver. It's just hidden in that room over there. But anyway, let me explain to you the pattern, and then I'm gonna bring my pre-cut pattern pieces that I've got over there to the table. We'll move this A0 out the way, and then I'm gonna explain to you what each of the pattern pieces do, and then we'll get straight to the sewing tutorial. This right here is the A0 sheet. Again, it comes with a 2x2 inch square that you can measure and make sure that you've scaled the pattern correctly. And you get this A0 sheet with the digital files too, so if you want to choose to take this to a print shop yourself and print it out, then you can do so too. But I make sure everything is scaled properly before it goes out to the public. Anyway, 2x2 inch square, scaled correctly, you know your pattern is sized right. Now, all of these different lines represent different sizes. You've got extra small, small, medium, large, XL, double XL, triple XL. Up here you have a sort of size coded system which represents which line you're meant to be cutting for your desired size. So for this tutorial I'm going to go as usual for the sample size of large, and I know that I'm cutting this sort of longer dashed and then 2 dots, longer dash, 2 dots throughout the whole pattern. So as you can see throughout the whole pattern, you have all your different pattern pieces. Bits that don't have any of the different dotted or dashed lines stay universally the same size throughout whatever pattern you're doing. And yeah, I'm pretty much just gonna go through this and cut out the desired size. I just wanted to mention, I mentioned it earlier, but I'm going to mention it again. We're going to be cutting out this size right here, which is the large. When you're cutting out the pattern, you're cutting directly along this line, and you're cutting directly along this line when you're cutting the fabric too. So we've added a 1/4 seam allowance to this pattern before we formatted it into a 2D sort of flat lay CAD system for you to build, but don't add any seam allowance. You really don't need to. Sew with me on a 1/4 seam allowance. It's the most universal seam allowance. It's the side of your domestic sewing foot, or you can just use the plate on your needle plate to find the 1/4 and follow along. If you want to add more seam allowance, be my guest, but we sew at a 1/4 seam allowance over here. Let's go. Okay, so I'm gonna now just very quickly walk you through all of the pattern pieces in paper, and then sort of just show you what they do, what certain markings mean, and then we will move on to cutting out our fabric. So I'll kind of explain to you like what sort of bits of fabric you need to cut out for what, and then show you visually how these pieces work, and then we'll move on to cutting the fabric, which I won't film too much of, and then we'll get straight to the sort of sewing tutorial side of things. So let's start with this front panel right here. So this right here is your main front panel, and essentially you're going to need 2 of these, hence why it says cut to mirrored. It basically means that your good sides of your fabric and your textured sides of your fabric, or your printed sides of your fabric, face each other. So one gets folded over and faces each other, and you're basically going to cut one of these, but then 2 bits of fabric are going to be underneath. That's why it says cut to mirrored. And that basically just means that you're going to have 2, one for your left side, one for your right side. Anyway, that is the front panel. As you can see, we've got a notch on the sleeve. We've also got this line that runs all the way down, and this sort of arrow line basically indicates your grain line, which means that if you're cutting something like denim, then you're going to want to make sure that all your grain line is facing the same direction, just for consistency and correct stretch throughout your whole garment. This is the center front, so you have like an inner center front piece that's going to connect to it. Let me show you now. Right, so I've just added a few more panel pieces to this just to visually show you. So on the inside, you're going to have lining pieces on your garment. The lining pieces might look a little bit different from your outer shell pieces, and they might be a little bit smaller from the center front. So your lining might only come to like here all the way up the center of your front panel. That is because we have these sort of inside facings of the garment. We have a center front inside facing, and we also have a front hem inside facing. These are going to go on the inside of the garment just to clean it up a little bit, and they connect to the lining, and I'll show you the process of that when we get there. Then we have a zipper shield. This works on the inside of your zipper, so your zipper doesn't get caught on your garment as you're zipping it up and down. And then finally we have little things like the chest pocket welt, and that will line up perfectly with the welt on the chest, and we've got another one for the bottom pocket placement too. But you don't really need to see that right now. We can get to that later, and I'll show you how it integrates. But that right there is the front panel. So now I'm going to show you the sleeve and how it pretty much works. As you can see, I cut this one out in large too. It says cut to mirrored, obviously, because you've got a left arm and you have a right arm. So you're going to need to cut 4 of these out because you need 2 panels for each side, 2 for the left and 2 for the right. Essentially, the reason that there is these curves is because we've added volume to this sleeve. Not as much volume as if you took part in making the aero jacket in the previous video. Obviously, that is a bit more of like a bomber jacket, so it needs a bit more volume. But for this jacket, there is the perfect amount of volume. And if you see, if I flip this panel piece over, it will perfectly connect down the side. And we basically want to sew this to this piece. And then when you turn it the right way, it will basically, that sort of, bit of volume will get turned into pushing a bit more volume to the inside of the garment right there. Anyway, this is the outer sort of shell, and the lining again looks a little bit different. I'll grab the panels, give me 1 second. I just showed you the front panel, and one thing I did want to mention before showing you the lining is you have these lines that run across towards the bottom right here. These lines you don't cut, that's why they are slightly skinnier. They're just to sort of represent where the inside facing of the sleeve hem is going to go. Basically, let me show you a visual representation on the lining. So these right here are your lining sleeves, and you're probably thinking that they are way shorter than your normal front sort of outer shell sleeves, and they are, and that is because we are integrating these 2 panels right here. We're integrating these 2 that match up perfectly to make them the same sort of length as the outer shell ones. But the difference is we're going to construct this and this out of our lining fabric, and then the facings of the inside of the sleeve hem are going to be out of the outside fabric, and they're going to connect up and just give it a little bit more structure towards the bottom of the sleeve. So essentially, just make sure you're looking for the right pattern pieces and make sure you're fully understanding what each of these sort of do. So one more thing before we move on to the back piece and then the collar and the little surprise thing that I'm going to integrate onto this jacket and show you how to do, which is new for the patterns, which is going to be quite fun. You can see that there is a buttonhole placement over here, and then there's a buttonhole placement over here too. This garment is going to be connected, but not connected all the way down. You can see that there's a little split here. I should have sort of shown this before, but that will overlap over and that buttonhole placement will match up. So it will have like a cuff that has a button in, I'm very self-taught, and if you're new to these tutorials, some of the terminology flies over my head. I'm trying to teach you the knowledge I can. If I mess up certain terminologies, or you can note that I've said something wrong in this tutorial, then I'm sorry, but this is what these tutorials are. Let's move on. So this is where it gets a little bit more exciting with the pattern pieces, because we've added something on this jacket which I think is going to be really fun to integrate, and once you sort of master it, it'll be super nice to wear and have it function on your jacket. It's called a bi-swing, and it basically is used for hunters to be able to hold their rifle and their sort of left arm, or whether you're right or left-handed, doesn't matter, but it's used for them to be able to hold their rifles out with their hunter jackets, and it gives them a little bit more movement in the back of the sleeve and that sort of like back yoke area of the jacket. We've integrated it to this, and I'm going to show you exactly how to sew it on this tutorial. But essentially it's just like, it's a pleat mixed with another panel called the sky, and it creates this thing called a bi-swing. It pretty much allows more movement, and it gives a little bit more extension to the arm when you're wearing it. It's a workwear inspired functionality that we've added. So let me break down the pattern. Right here you have the back yoke, and as you can see, this is quite a small back yoke for the large, but I'm going to explain how this works in a minute. Below that you have the center panel, you have the side back panel, and then as you can see, there's kind of one missing over this side here, and that is because this panel reflects, and it says on it, it says to cut to mirrored. And then on the back you can see we have an inside facing right here that works the same as them front facings, and that sleeve facing that I showed you just a minute ago. Now right here we have the pleat facing, and then we have the back sky right there. And these two panels connect together with the side back panel and the back yoke. I'm going to show you how to do this in the tutorial, so I won't go too far into depth there, but essentially it gives this jacket, like I said, that bi swing, that extra mobility with moving your arms forward, which functions perfectly with hunter gear and works perfect on a Detroit jacket, like that workwear kind of esque stuff. Now let me show you just the last panel pieces, and then we'll get onto the full tutorial itself. Next we have the collar. As normal, you just have cut to mirrored. You can choose to do this one out of like a totally separate fabric if you want. Some people like to use a corduroy on Detroit jackets, but I'm just going to use what I have in the studio, so we'll figure that one out when we get there. Again, you've got the grain line arrow, and this time we've sort of chose to do this curved collar, which normally you might have like a straight collar, but we've chosen to sort of curve this one so it naturally fits. So it naturally fits on the body a little bit better. Yeah, that's the collar. You've got your notches too for shoulder seam reference. Here I've sort of like pinned all these pieces together, but this is pretty much all the panel pieces that you're going to be cutting out of your inner lining. So you've got the front pocket bag, and you can choose to use this. It basically just folds over, and this would be your front sort of pocket bag, and it matches up perfectly, and then you sew that into your pocket. But we might not use this in the tutorial. If we don't, I'll show you the alternative way of using it, but it's just a perfect sort of reference for people that like to stick to the pattern. Same with this. This is your chest pocket bag, but again, if you fold this over, it makes quite a small sort of chest pocket bag. So I very much recommend cutting the length of your pocket bag to your desired size. I like to do deep pockets, so I like to make these a little bit longer. And then finally, this one, I don't know why I've lumped this one with it. This is the inside pocket. And again, it's probably worth noting now, you cut this one out of your outer shell fabric, and you can choose to make this one bigger or sort of more deeper with the length as you desire. Again, it does say at the top, 1/2 inch hem allowance. This means on this part of the fabric, you are going to add a little bit more when you're cutting your fabric, and then it just allows you for a double fold at the top of the pocket when you're hemming and closing up that sort of pocket. And that is that. The next parts are just your lining, and these are some of the panels that we've already gone over. So you have your two sleeves that we've already shown you. They're going to be cut out of your lining fabric. And then what I was mentioning earlier, you have your back lining right here. This is slightly smaller to your outer shell back panel. And as you can see, this is all in one piece. We're not obviously going to do that sky and pleat on the inside. So this is just one piece of fabric, but it matches up perfectly when you build it. And then just as we mentioned earlier, this right here is your front lining, and it is slightly sort of like smaller in width than your outer shell because you're going to connect the center front facing of your outer sort of fabric to the side. And then obviously you have little things like the markings on all of the pattern pieces for where pockets should perfectly match. And with this pocket, we're probably going to leave the side of this raw, so we're not going to fold it over. We're going to connect it to the inside of the facing right here on the side, and then we're going to fold these over, and it'll be a nice workwear sort of inside pocket. And that is all the panel pieces. So I thought I'd sort of get that out the way at the beginning of the tutorial. There should have been a little timestamp code to jump past this part if you already understand all the pattern pieces, but it's good that you understand everything before we start constructing. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out all of my fabric, explain the fabric I'm using, and then we'll get to the main construction of the tutorial. Let's go. So now we're on fabrics, and I think this is one of the most important parts of the process, because if you don't have good fabrics, you're probably not going to enjoy your sewing project. For me, I always find it so hard to be able to find perfect heavy canvas in the sort of region that I'm in the world. I'm in the UK. If I was in like America, I'm sure it'd be quite easy to sort of source like some super heavy duty workwear canvas. In fact, it is. I've looked online, and there is some really cool stuff. But sometimes we've got to make do with what we have. And I did just go to Berlin in Germany, and I found some really nice sort of like German milled heavy sort of 400 GSM canvas. But I decided against using it because I hadn't dyed it yet, and it was raw, and I didn't want to show the tutorial with a raw sort of fabric. Anyway, what I have chosen to go with my project is I'm upcycling these military bags and military sort of things. This right here is a sort of military stretcher where you'd sort of, you know, rescue someone. So hopefully someone's not died on this, but it's a bed, and there would be poles that run on the left and the right, and then obviously that would turn into a bed. But I'm upcycling this into part of the jacket, and this is some really, really nice, like heavy 400 GSM, like duck canvas. And then I've got another one of them right there, and I've got a final one of them, but this final one's a little bit dirty, so I'm not entirely sure whether I'm going to use this one. And then I have a really nice green army bag that I'm going to use for some of the details, so I'm going to take this apart too. And then I also have these like military sort of carry bags, but I'm not entirely sure whether I'm going to use them fully. However, I might take some of the details off and resew them onto the garment. So for me, this is going to be a little bit more of an upcycle project, which is something that I don't really do within Roughcut anymore. I normally like to purchase the clean, nice fabrics, and I like to go with the sort of painting and that sort of aspect with telling stories through the garments and stuff. So I don't really do this anymore, but I do love it, and it is the origins of how I started sewing. So I'm not really sure how this is going to come out, but what I can imagine is that we're going to create the best workwear Detroit jacket that is upcycled from old military stretchers and duffel bags. But I do really encourage this, and I think that I'm sort of explaining this as if this is like a bad thing to do. It's an amazing thing to do. I just don't normally do it anymore, and I don't know what it's going to be like doing a tutorial with it because I can't actually envision the final piece yet. However, I do very much encourage people to go to, like, obviously, you know, scrap stores and places where you can buy old curtains and turn them into clothes and all that sort of thing. Upcycling is amazing, and obviously it's the origins of Roughcut. But I really wanted to sort of find some sort of heavy canvas that was brand new because I felt like it would be the perfect way to show how this garment was finished. But there's a local army shop and I found this, so we're going to work with it. So now I'm going to go and cut out all the fabric, and the way that I'm going to do that is I'm pretty much just going to correlate what it says on the pattern piece itself. So it'll tell you to cut one outer shell and one lining, and I'm pretty much just going to do that, and then I'm going to time lapse this sort of process, and then yeah, we'll sort of touch bases when all the fabric's cut out, and then we'll get to the sewing tutorial. And I didn't mention the lining, but all of this stuff I got from a scrap store, and this was all old curtains from a very local curtain making company called Linwood. They're based like a few miles away from us, and they basically gave all their offcuts to a scrap store, and I went and bought their £50 per metre fabric for £5 per metre. So big up Linwood and big up the scrap store for having the best fabrics for super cheap. But I really like this sort of I guess this curtain sort of weaved jacquard type fabric. I think it's amazing for using in the lining of your jackets, and I highly recommend it, especially for doing a Detroit jacket, because it needs to be kind of blanket lined on the inside. So I don't actually know which one I'm going to pick, but if I could pick off the top of my head, I would say that this one right here with this pattern would work really, really nice with that green. Maybe not. We'll see. Maybe the purple. When we get to cutting out the lining fabric, I'll decide. So I'm actually going to upcycle a lot of the pieces that I'm finding on this fabric. This is really, really nice. Now I'm sort of getting a different view of what I'm doing for it, but I think I can even use this sort of weathered sort of side piece for welted parts of the pocket, or I can potentially upcycle it as the zipper shield and just sort of contrast the piece a little bit more than what you normally would, and maybe I can sort of piece some bits together. And I might actually try and keep this original Safari logo and actually try and resew it on. This is just going to turn into a full upcycle project / walkthrough, so I guess we'll just take this video as it goes. But yeah, I'm upcycling all of it. I'm going to add this strap back on too because it's super, super nice with this buckle. Yeah, so we'll use what we have and turn this into a super nice sort of hunting / working jacket / military jacket, you know. So yeah. This is like a 70-year-old sticker. Maybe it's from like the 1950s, but I'm trying to be really careful not to rip it, so I can actually stitch it back on, because it's kind of like a fabric sticker. I f***ing ripped it! Oh no! No! Oh well, it's a bit mouldy anyway, isn't it, really? Now, whilst I'm picking the pattern pieces, I thought it was just interesting for me to mention this. You're sort of viewing this as a compilation, but you just saw that I sewed these two pieces together. These are the bits that were on the outside of that stretcher, but I've chose to sew some together so then I can get certain panels that wouldn't fit on a singular one. You know, don't be afraid to just sew pieces together and then cut the pattern out of the bigger shape afterwards. It just makes it easier when doing the process. Just get stuck right into the upcycling side of things. Yeah. I'm just going through and cutting out all the panel pieces. This part is usually like the pre-production of making your piece of clothing, and it can be the most important part to get right. So when you get to sewing it, it sort of makes your sewing sort of process a little bit easier. Cutting fabric is a bit long, but that's why I've got one of these. Just because it makes it a little bit easier for me, I'm actually going to throw just a pin in which side the front facing, the right good side is. I'm sure you can just spin it over and see the seam that you just created anyway, but just for reference, you can just throw a pin in the right side so you always know that that is the correct side that you're looking at. And obviously I just cut out this one, so now I'm going to have to just cut two mirrored, and I'm going to have to cut another one out of this. So I need to do a little bit more sewing. I'm going to go with this gold sort of like yellow lining. It's not yellow, but whatever colour this is, like that khaki sort of colour. It's got like a really sort of like wide weave on it, which is super nice, and it's lighter than the other bits of lining that I picked out and showed you earlier. So I'm going to go for this one. I haven't cut out the collar, and I'm yet to cut out the inside pocket bags because I might try and find another fabric to do that. But I have cut out all of the rest of the panel pieces here, and I've gone with some contrast on some of the facings and that sky piece on the back. So this is going to look really, really nice. I've still got to figure out the collar, but for now I'm going to cut out the lining, and for that I'm using all the pieces, obviously like I mentioned, that have this, it says top sleeve lining cut to, and then obviously you've got your front lining cut to, the back lining cut to, and then you've got the small sleeve cut to. And that is everything for the lining, and then we should be able to get into construction. So what I'm doing now is I'm just sort of categorizing everything together, just making it a bit easier for me to sort of understand what's going on with the pattern. For example, the top sleeve inside facing, that bigger panel can go over there with the lining, and the same with this one. It's getting hot in here because the iron is on and it just literally steams everywhere. But now I've categorized everything into the right sort of panels. So we have everything over here for the back piece of clothing, like the whole back panel, the sky, the pleat. Then we have the outside sleeves, the outside front panels with the facings. Then we have the lining with the facings, and then we have, well, that is pretty much everything. I'm going to clean up the whole place, make sure that all the sort of rubbish and scraps are in the right place. Make sure you don't throw away the good scraps, because you will end up using them later down the line for things like the welted sort of pockets and stuff like that. So make sure you go through your scraps and don't throw everything away. I'm going to sort of get my table ready for the tutorial and showing you how to sew, and then, yeah, I'll catch you in a second. Before we go deep into the build, I want to quickly talk about the fabric, because with workwear, fabric is not just an afterthought, it's one of the most important parts of the garment. Denim, hickory stripe, canvas, cotton drill, and twill. These fabrics all come from a world where clothing had to be strong, practical, repairable, and worn hard. That's why they matter. They don't just look good when they're new. They fade, soften, crease, mark, and become yours over time. And because you already put in the hours to cutting, sewing, pressing, top stitching a garment, the fabric you choose needs to be worthy of that time. You don't need to buy the most expensive cloth in the world, but you do need to understand what you're buying. A lighter cotton might be perfect for the first version. A heavier canvas might make the garment feel more traditional. Hickory stripe gives you that classic railroad and painter workwear feeling. Denim gives you that structure, fading, and long-term character. And that's exactly why inside every workwear series pattern that we've released, I've added more than just the pattern pieces. You'll find a QR, resources, fabric guidance, supplier options, thread recommendations, fabric weight notes, and regional buying routes. So whether you're in the UK, Europe, or US, or somewhere else entirely, you've got a clearer starting point to find the right fabrics and threads. You're not meant to figure it all out alone. The pattern gives you the shape, the tutorial walks you through the build, the resources help you make better decisions, and the community is there if you get stuck. The whole series is built to support you through the process, because the goal is not just to make one garment, the goal is to understand fabric, construction, history, and design, so you can build clothing that actually lasts. So we are going to tackle the back first, and this is the most exciting part for me, mainly because it's a new technique which I think when done correctly it will be really, really nice. And once this is fully constructed, there's quite a lot of panels. Sometimes if you're new to sewing or you've made one jacket before, you're used to all of these panels being one panel, and then obviously you do all the designing from there and connect it to the front pieces. But there is a lot of paneling in this, and with that pleat and the sky, it kind of, you know, pieces together to be this really nice paneled back piece. As you can see, I had a few of these different types of stretchers, the beds that I showed you at the beginning. So if you come a little bit closer, you can see that the middle panel and the yoke is slightly sort of a different shade than the two side panels of the back piece. And then obviously the pleat is a different color, and then the sky is a different color too. The way we're going to construct this, well, before I mention how we're going to construct this, I'm using a Tech 60 thread. This is Coats, and I'm using this throughout the whole garment, I think. I'm doing this because this is a little bit thicker than your average thread, with stuff like military bags and camping beds and all that sort of military stuff. It's quite like heavy fabric, so you want the top stitches to show up and not get lost in the actual garment itself. So thick thread, as long as your machine can handle it, which it can. If you're using something like a domestic machine and you go and buy like a big spool like this, you can just put it in like a jar, or you could put it on one of them attachable things that go next to your machine. If you try and put this on the top of your domestic machine, it probably won't work. So anyway, thick thread. And then let me show you now how to construct this. Basically, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 panels for this right now. So we're going to focus first on the middle section of the back. We're going to attach the two side pieces to the center back piece, just like this. And then we're going to attach the yoke and sort of pull that in and stitch it. And then we are going to attach the pleat to the middle piece, and then we're going to attach the sky, and I'll show you how it all works. And that will sort of build this pleat out on this garment. It's going to be quite panelled, and one thing I mentioned earlier, which I will mention once more, is just that if you do want to add extra seam allowance to be able to do flat fell seams on, for example, this sort of midsection, then feel free to do so. I'm doing everything at a 1/4 seam allowance here, and I'm not going to be flat felling any of these seams. However, I will be top stitching them, so it will have the same sort of feel to it. So anyway, let's basically just get started, and then we should get it done quite quick. One thing with these pleats on the left and right is that you're probably going to have to flip them. So I'm going to put this one on this side and the other one on the other side. The reason you're going to do this is because once this whole back piece is sewn together, we're going to be sewing this front facing together. So put the opposing sky and pleats together, and then we're just going to move them to the side for now, but just make sure you make 2 little piles. What we're going to focus on, we can move this facing out the way, the bottom back facing. We don't need that right now. And we're just going to build these 4 panels together. The way we're going to do this, I'm going to just explain and then I'm going to show you. So flip the back side piece over and sew over 1/4 seam allowance to the center back. Flip it back, hit it with a top stitch. Do the exact same thing for the other side and then stitch it together. Then the length of this top piece should be perfect, so then you can do the exact same thing for the top yoke. And then we have a panelled back piece. What I'm going to do, as I have a few different little bits of buckles and things that we took off the stretchers, I'm actually going to use this as a sort of a type of buckle back for the jacket that doesn't necessarily like function. Well, I guess it will function if you do use it right, but that's basically going to go at the bottom of my back panels. And then I'm actually going to add some rough cut patches around this just to fill it out a little bit, and then any details on top of that. So once it's all panelled would be when you design. Let's start with the sewing. And by the way, now we're at the point of sewing. I might as well explain this whilst I'm threading my machine. You don't need to use an industrial machine. I mentioned it very briefly at the beginning, but all of these sewing tutorials are completely available to do on a domestic machine. And I prove this by making full garments on my domestic machine out in different countries. And that is a playlist on my YouTube, so you can navigate to the playlist sort of tab and check out me sewing in different places. I have a brand new sort of one coming soon in Egypt, and then I'm about to go off on another adventure this Tuesday, and that should be quite exciting, but I won't reveal where I'm going yet. But I've got the fabric all printed and we're ready to go. So yeah, it's a good representation of the fact that you can build full jackets and full pieces with domestic machines. Anyway, you don't need one of these. Back to the tutorial.
Do you want it on the wide?
Now I've sewn with the front facing, so the good sides of the fabric, I've sewn the side back to the center back with the 1/4 seam allowance. This is probably where you're going to need an iron. If you have added extra seam allowance and you're doing it with a flat fell seam, then you can figure the flat fell seam out. I'm not going to show you what that is in this video. I think I mentioned earlier that I was, but I kind of cut everything at a 1/4. So we are going to do everything with a top stitch rather than a flat fell seam. This way you're going to get your iron, and then you're just going to press your seams and then hit them with a top stitch after. What I do is make sure that my top stitches are facing inwards, so the sort of loose thread sort of faces to the outside, and then it just cleans up with consistency on your final piece. But that's going to look really, really nice. And that right there, that is your top stitch. So now we've just done the top stitching on the 2 side pieces connecting to the center front. We're going to do the exact same thing for the yoke. So the yoke comes over, but before it does, I just wanted to show you that now you should have done the 1/4 seam allowance. It will connect up perfectly width-wise, and then it can just fold over, line it up 1/4, and then when it turns around, you're just hitting that top stitch. I like to have the top stitch fold facing down. So now we have just sewn the 2 side back pieces to the center. We can actually get our yoke, and you can see that the length of the bottom of the yoke is the same as the length of the 2 side pieces and the center piece together now. So we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to fold it over, and we're going to hit it with a 1/4 and then hit it with a top stitch. But if you wanted to add little details, like I've got a little bit of this excess of the stretcher, I'm just going to throw it in there now. And then when I'm going along with that stitch, it's just going to be integrated into the stitch. And then when I turn it the right way and it's all sewn together, I have a little cool thing hanging. This is kind of cool with the upcycling, and just use what you have and don't throw any of these little bits away because they're quite fun to you know, get involved with the project. So now you have sewn this together right here, the whole back piece. We're obviously missing our bi-swing, that kind of sky and the pleat that attaches to the side, but I'll show you how to do that in a second. I was just gonna say, I'm gonna get some of my rough cut patches and I'm gonna integrate them onto the back of the piece of clothing itself. I think for this tutorial, I don't know where that cable came from, but there we have it. For this tutorial, it's quite prior to the actual drop of these patterns. So I don't know whether I've actually released a sort of drop of these printed patches. I think I will have for this release. So cut to Post Jack and he'll explain them all to you now. Hello, so it's Post Jack. We're about a week out from the drop of the Workwear series, and me and Vince is my editor. Here is a photo of Vince. We're editing lots and trying to get as many of these tutorials out as possible, but I just wanted to say that these patch sheets are available. They are cheaper on early access, a little bit less expensive on early access, but public release, they should still be up on the website. If not, they will be completely sold out. There are 3 different variations. So there is the Edo Fragments V2, and that is basically the second version of the last patch sheets that we dropped that sold out in 2 hours of being live. And then there is the cultural sort of patch sheets right here, and then there is the map Atlas patch sheets right here, and the stock is very limited. So if you're interested in buying some of this amazing nice fabric, it is 300 GSM completely organic cotton, and they're really nice to sort of cut and stitch to the garments, and it just brings you a little bit closer into that rough cut world of what I do on a lot of my pieces. I'll quickly show you right now. I've got stuff like this. You know, on every single piece there is rough cut patch sheets, you know, just integrated in different ways. So yeah, if you're interested, go and grab some. Hopefully they're not already sold out. Back to Jack in the tutorial. So now we're back, and pretty much, yeah, go grab them if you want them. I'm going to add some previous ones, some nice green ones to this, and it will look super, super clean. And then yeah, we'll smash out the bi-swing afterwards. So I've now finished all of the designing. I've added this little buckle on the bottom. I've added these 2 patches, and then we have that little swinging thing that we added earlier. I'm now going to show you how to implement the pleat, that sort of, and I'm really excited for it because I genuinely think it's like, it will look really cool once it's done. I've never really messed around with this technique much, so to be able to make a pattern with Geo and bring it to life and show you guys how to build it too is really cool. So how do we do this? We can move one to the side because we don't actually need to show you the other side right just yet. But what we want is obviously the front facing of one of them. So you can see that now when, you know, both good sides facing upwards, you can see that the curves oppose each other, and that is because we want to place the pleat. This one is the pleat, and this one right here is the sky. So we want to place the pleat front facing, and you can see that it matches up perfectly, just like that. We're going to hit a 1/4 top stitch all the way down, and then we're actually going to turn this inside out. So it should be sitting on the inside perfectly, just like this. And then we can run a top stitch all the way down. And then, just to explain it, you can see the sky then matches up perfectly with the pleat, and then you can sew the sort of pleat and the sky in separately just down here. Then it should look something a little bit like this, where this pleat functions, this bit is top stitched, and then you should have the contrast of the different color pleat and then the sky, and it will look super, super, super nice. So yeah, let's get to it. Again, first thing is getting your pleat, the sort of back pleat, and then we're gonna do the front facings so the curves match up just like this. Then we're gonna hit a 1/4 stitch all the way down. You can see that now it should look something very similar to this, where your pleat is sewn to the front facing. And now when we turn this over and sort of flip it round, I'm actually going to iron this down, but for now I'm just going to visually show you what it should look like. Once ironed properly it'll look better, but right now it should look something a little bit like this. And then you're going to hit a top stitch all the way down that. So now you can visually see that I have just done the top stitch, and one little thing that I really like to do with my top stitches is that I like to sort of hang one sort of side over a little bit more than the other, so it creates this sort of look that makes it look like it has sort of piping on the edge of it. And I really like that because with the contrast of the pleat on the inside, it's going to look super nice when you implement the actual other side, which should look something a little bit like that, you see? I mean, obviously it's not lined up perfectly, but it should look like that, which is super nice. So you can turn this panel over and then you can see that you can actually line up the sky perfectly with the pleat. And then what we're going to do is throw a few pins in this, but make sure we're not throwing a pin through the back panel. We're just throwing pins through these two layers right here, all the way around, and then we're going to stitch all of this down. But obviously we're not stitching the back panel, we're just running a stitch along these two sort of lines, and then that will actually close up our sky. And you can see it should look something a little bit like that, which is super nice. Let's do it. Now we have sewn with the top stitch this pleat down to the inside of our main back panel. Now it's all together. We want to make sure that we're now placing this panel so it matches up with the pleat. You can see there it all sort of lines up to the corner. Now, the most important thing here is when you're putting and sort of implementing the sky into the pleat, you really want to make sure that the side seam is the perfect length. So you can see that that's not. We can actually move this up a little bit and it should match up with the actual bottom of the pleat. It's good because these contrast in colour. So that is perfect now, and we can see that the length of this side seam is perfect. So I'm going to throw a pin into this, and I'm going to do that by throwing a pin just into the two layers and not letting that sort of run onto the back panel. We can see that now that length of the side seam of the front, we're using the front as a reference here just to line it up, and we can see they're the same length, which is great. And now we just want to do the same thing with the top shoulder seam. So we can line that up and we can sort of move it about a tiny bit to make sure it's the same length. Just because I overlapped that top stitch, you can see there where I did that sort of piping, it meant that it didn't line up absolutely correctly now, because they're meant to be the same length and it's meant to be, you know, sewn together perfectly with a top stitch, but because I did this piping, it's now meant that this pattern piece has a little bit more to it, but we can trim that down and that is all good. Basically, you can see now that that length is perfect too, just like that. And then we're going to throw a pin in there too. I'm going to do this one from the inside, just like that. And you can see that now the pleat lines up with the sky all the way down. And then when you can turn this the right way up, you can see that it looks perfect there. Again, I have a little bit of excess up here, but I'm just going to trim it off. It should all work perfectly. I just hit it with a little, just like that. And now you can do the same with the bottom bit down here, making sure there's no pins in the way. And you can see that the front panel matches up perfectly. The side seam there, the length, we're just making sure the lengths are the same, because otherwise you're going to come into problems later on. And then the shoulder seam is the same, and that is perfect too. So we know that this is now in the exact placement that we want it to be. And now what we can do is sort of pull the back open, and we can hit all of these two layers with a 1/4 stitch all the way around, and that's going to close up this pleat. And then on the outside, if you feel like you want to, you can just sort of close this up here and close it up here. But we want this pleat to work, so obviously you're not sewing around anything up here. We're leaving it so it functions and opens. So yeah, let's get to sewing around it. You can sort of just move the back panel out the way, fold it out the way so you can get a perfect stitch all the way down. It's not too complicated. Now you've sewn all the way around that, you can just cut the excess threads, and then we can just do that little stitch we were talking about earlier where we just run a little tack along the bottom here. Just to close it up, and then the same for the top. And just like that, you can now see that this super nice bi-swing works really, really nice. And when you sort of open that arm a bit wider, it gives you a little bit more mobility. I'll show you that over here. When you open it, you get a little bit more mobility out of this back panel, which is exactly what we want. I hope I explained that the right way so you fully understood it. But the main thing is you want to sew that pleat into the back panel. Make sure you turn it inside out, iron it, top stitch it. I wouldn't now recommend doing that piping sort of overlapping underneath because the shapes won't match up perfectly. But if you do choose to do it, it still does work. And then you're just implementing that back sky piece onto the pleat, and then making sure that the length of the side panel lines up, and making sure that the length of your top shoulder seam lines up too. And then we're doing the exact same thing for the other side, and then it will start to make sense, and then we'll move on to the front panel. So yeah, let's do it. So I just finished the other sky on the other side of the back panel, and now you can see we have this perfectly integrated sort of section that gives your back of your shoulders a little bit more breathing room instead of stretching this back yoke, which is perfect. This is what we want. We want to give it that sort of like hunter's feel. This is quite a compact jacket. It's not like the Aero. It doesn't give you too much space. It's going to be very perfectly fitted to your body. So you want the pattern cutting and the pattern making and the drafting and just your final sort of garment. You know, we want it to have that sort of bi-swing because you don't get that excess volume elsewhere like the bomber jackets right here. But yeah, I think it's really, really nice. I've matched it all up perfectly, and we can obviously, like I said before, we can just measure to make sure that the side seams match perfectly in length, and the same with the top shoulder seam matches perfectly just like that. And you want to make sure on both sides that is the case, because when we go to sort of like sewing this jacket together, if it doesn't match, you're going to have problems with connecting your arms into your armholes, or you're going to have problems with connecting your shoulders up, and it will just all be a bit of a messy process. So again, make sure that the lengths on the side seams match up. I kind of messed up by doing that sort of piping with the top stitch, so I overlaid one over the other slightly more, which pulled the pattern piece in a bit more than it should have. But then I accounted for that. I measured the sides and I cut a little bit off the top, which I probably shouldn't have because now it's a little bit different in the pattern, but it shouldn't make a difference. It's only a few millimeters. Anyway, now we're going to move on from this back piece. This is finished now and I'm really liking the look of it. I'm going to move this to the side and we're going to focus in on two front panels. Now you can do this super simple. You don't need to add too many details. This is a Detroit jacket sort of style. It's called the Yard jacket, obviously. It's not called the Detroit, but it's inspired by that Detroit jacket. It does have two welted pockets, which are just perfect, easy access, diagonal for your daily sort of wearing. And then it does have one zip welted pocket. So I think I'm going to follow that consistency, but one side is going to be a zip welted pocket and the other side is going to be a few little patches and details. And then maybe if I can rework in some little buckles and bits here and there, then I will do. Now, you've got these two front panels, and let me just grab something. What I just grabbed was the paper pattern itself, and it does have sort of markings for the exact placements of the pockets, which I'm actually going to follow this time. Usually I just say wing it, but sometimes you don't have the pattern around when you're building the jackets. You know, you might be just freehanding it or whatever. So I built a little tool. It's not that great, but it basically lines up the corner of seam of your jacket itself, and then you've got like when it's ironed down, you've got a perfect placement, and you know that the arrows are indicating to the center front, and then you can just flip it over and do the same on the other side, and then you know your welted pockets are in the exact sort of placement every time. This kind of helped me a lot before I was building patterns, because I would just, you know, draft my own jackets, and then I wouldn't always have the pattern around or markings for where I wanted them pockets. But I just made this. It's just a little thing that I can use over and over again. So if something like that helps you, then you can do it yourself. But we do have the markings now. So I'm going to grab the paper, and what I'm going to do is I am just going to follow the size guide right here. So you can see that there's a size guide of where your pocket sort of sits, and they get slightly bigger depending on the size that you're doing. So I'm going to pick my perfect size, which is my large. I'm going to find it in amongst this here, and then I'm just going to mark it with a Sharpie so I have it, and then I'm going to mark it with a wax pen right here. And we're going to do the same for the chest pocket up here too. So now we've sort of excluded out the perfect sort of placements for our pockets. Then we can sort of pull the pattern up itself, and I'm using a Sharpie so I can sort of gauge that right there is the spot, because I can see it through the paper. And then I'm going to make sure it's all lined up again. And then I'm going to do the same for up here too. So we're just marking with a wax pen. I like to use wax over chalk, mainly because for me it works better with ironing it off, and I really don't like the consistency of chalk personally. So now you can see that I have made my markings. So what you're probably going to want to do is get a ruler and just run a line down your welted pocket marker, and then I'm going to do the same for the top, just like that. And now we have the two markings for the main sort of diagonal pocket and the zipper welt. Now what I'm going to do in this tutorial, just to save time, sorry for throwing you about different places, but I'm going to tell you to go and check out this video right here, which is my welted pocket tutorial video. If I show you how to do 3 welted pockets in this video, to be honest, it's going to take too much time. So I recommend you go over to the welted pocket tutorial and understand the full process of the welted pocket, then come back and we'll be at the same point. The welted pocket with the zip is the exact same process. You're just integrating a zip when you get to the certain point where you're putting the 2 tabs in. But you should have the same pattern pieces to be able to understand the same as the welted pocket tutorial video. Head over there, do the welted pockets, come back to this video, and I'm gonna sort of visually speed it up. So I'm still gonna show you what I'm doing in parts, but yeah.
Oh no.
That's right. So I just absolutely smashed through them welted pockets. As I said, if you're interested in making the welted pockets, which obviously you are, I'd head over to the welted pocket tutorial. And as I said before, the only thing that is the difference about the zip welted pocket is you're literally just integrating a zip before you do the pocket bag, and it works the exact same. But I'm really, really happy with how this has come out and the placement of the pockets using the Sharpie to mark them out. is perfect. Another alternate way of doing this is you can actually just get like a razor blade or something and cut the pocket out, and then you can draw it on once the pattern's over so you know it's perfect. But yeah, what I'm gonna do now just to finish this front 2 panels, which I'm really liking the look of, is I'm actually just going to finish designing, add some rough cut patches, and then we will move on to the sleeves, which is super simple. I just finished some of the details on the front. I added a little rough cut official logo, and then I added these 2 patches on the side here, and I did a little detail where I carried on the stitch out of the patch, which I really, really like. And I think this front panel's looking super nice now. So that sort of finishes it for the front and the back. Haven't made a garment like this in a long time, to be honest, like an upcycled sort of military thing. I think I've said that about 1,000 times in this video, but I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it a lot. What is the next part of the process? So we've done the 2 front panels. You have now learnt to do the welted pockets on the separate video. We tackled the back of the garment together. So we can sort of move all these panel pieces to the side for now and just throw them over here. And then what we can get, all the sort of facings and stuff like that, you would have cut out like the back facing, which should look like this. It's the long strip. Then you've got the 2 front bottom facings, like the hem facings. And then you've got the center front facings, and we don't need them for now, but just make sure you don't lose them. Same with this zipper shield. I kind of put this one separate and made sure it had the paper on still so I don't get it confused with the center front facings. But the panels that we're going to focus in on are these right here, which are the sleeves. And then after we focused on these, I'm just going to show you how to do the sleeves with the bottom hem facings on. And then we'll move into actually starting to like construct and put this whole thing together. It's quite a quick process as far as these tutorials go. Definitely a quicker process than the aero jacket and the Keystone denims, but we still have a little bit of a way to go. So we're going to focus in on the sleeves right now. And I just had to have a little bit of a brain sort of like recap on how I would do this so it was seamless. So now I can sort of explain to you the way that I can imagine it's going to work. And then later down the line, we can sort of figure it out together. Not regarding the sleeves, but regarding what we're going to do down here. In this sort of point, what we want to do is make it so it has an opening, just like this. The rest of the sleeves is all the way up, just in this area here is sewn together. And down here, we're going to have a cuff. So these are actually going to connect with a button, and then you're going to be able to do the sleeve up. Now, the way that we're going to do this is we're basically going to introduce these bottom panels, the hem facings of our sleeve from the lining. We're not going to sew any of this together, but we're just going to introduce this in the right way it should go, like as if it was sat there already. And we're just going to, with our wax pen, you can see there's like a little curve and a bevel. On the higher up tip, we're just going to mark a 1/4 inch sort of marking. And we're going to do the same on the other side, just right there. And we're going to save this marking for later because we're going to use this when, you know, we're doing this opening, this sort of cuff opening with the button system. What we're going to do now is we're actually going to use them markings just to line up where we're going to start and stop our stitching. And we're going to start around this area where we've just made this notch. And we're going to run our stitch all the way up to the top of the longer sleeve side. But we're not going to sew down here because this part down here is going to be our sleeve cuff. And we're also not going to trim or cut this notch. We're going to leave this notch how it is, referencing the inside hem facings. And then we're going to stitch a 1/4, turn it back on itself, and then we're going to top stitch that 1/4 down, only to the notch. You can see there, I started right on that notch right there. We're just going to forget about all this down here. We're going to focus on that a little bit later. And now you can see that when we turn this the right way up, you can see that this is naturally wanting to start folding over because we've made this sort of, you know, split. But we're going to ignore that for now. And we're going to actually throw a top stitch from exactly where we started sewing, just on that notch right there. We're going to throw a top stitch all the way down this sleeve. Make sure to use an iron for this. I'm being kind of stupid and not, but... And just like that, this is the start of what our sort of, you know, cuff is going to look like. But we're going to leave it like that for now and do the exact same procedure so we get the other side of the sleeve, obviously with the other smaller panel and the bigger sleeve panel to the same part of the process. We're going to get it to the same stage. So just to sort of relay that again, we're going for this feel right here. We're trying to make it get to this stage right here. The way we're going to do it is looking at the opposite sides. I'm just going to lay that hem facing down and mark that 1/4 inch on the side, and then we're going to do the exact same thing for the other side. And then we're going to put the front facings together, match the notches, and then as I just shown you, we are going to sew this 1/4, but just down to the notch, or you can start on the notch again, that's your choice. So you can see we get down to that notch. We're just going to drop a little back and forth stitch, and then we're going to cut our threads, and we're going to tackle that later. I'm going to show you exactly how to tackle that later. And right now, whilst we're here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw that top stitch in again that we just did before. Now we've got both sleeves to the same sort of, you know, part of the process. And what we're going to do now is we're literally just going to flip this in half, front facings, and we're going to connect up the shorter side now. So you're literally just going to fold this in half, front sides facing, and we're just going to stitch with a 1/4 seam allowance all the way up this other side. And we're just closing off this sleeve now. So now I've sewn that 1/4 seam allowance down that smaller edge. You should see the shape of the sleeve coming to sort of fruition now. We can take shape and it becomes the sleeve. Now you can hit that really annoying top stitch that runs all the way down the inside right there. But I think I'm just going to do the top stitch to around this sort of area here. And then I'm going to do the same here where I'm just hitting that top stitch a little bit further down. And then later on I'm going to press it so it does the same thing, but I can't be bothered to put it through my machine and start, you know, messing around with that top stitch because this fabric is really, really heavy and strong. So I'm just going to do this top stitch so it runs, I don't know, a few inches, and do the same from the other side. So it's a bit easier because you have that cuff opening now to get in here. I'm just going to do it to around that sort of area there. Hit a little bit of a back and forth stitch and then leave it there. I think that's going to look quite nice and decorative when we finish the garment itself. And we're going to do the same for the other side. So this is the sleeve cap side right here, and we're just going to do the top stitch so it goes down a few inches on that side like we've done down the bottom here. So now I've top stitched the start and the finish of this little seam that we've just done. I'm actually just going to press the rest of this. So I'm going to move it into the middle. Then I'm going to grab my iron and just hit this with a press. That's just going to make our sleeve a little bit cleaner when we get round to it being finished. Just like that. Now that is one sleeve finished, and we can actually turn that inside out. You can see that press has just cleaned up that seam. We have the top stitch started from the sleeve cap and then the top stitch that we started down there. I quite like that it doesn't go the full way. So yeah, we have the opening here for the cuff that we've just left. We got the notch that we're ready to sort of tackle later. For now, we're just going to leave this how it is, and we're going to do the exact same thing for the other side. So this one is on this part of the process. We're just going to fold it over. We're going to do the 1/4 all the way down, and then I'm going to hit the little top stitch from the top and the bottom, and then hit it with a press, and then Both sleeves will be at the same point when I've turned it inside out. So I've decided that I'm going to leave it there for tonight. I need to show you how to sew the inner lining sleeves, and then obviously we are pretty much on to construction then. I finished all the details on the front. I showed you how to do the bi-swing on the back of the shirt, but tomorrow we're going to tackle the collar, we're going to tackle the construction, the seamless construction with the sleeves, the cuffs, adding buttons and all that sort of thing. So for now, I'm going to go. It's quite late. We've done a full day of it. Tomorrow we're going to come back bright and early and smash this whole process out, and it will be literally a click of a fingers for you. See you in a bit. And just like that, we are back and it's a brand new day. So, fresh mind, and we're going to tackle the lining of the sleeve and the bottom hem facings of the sleeve too. And we're pretty much going to construct this just like we did for the outer shell sleeves, where we're going to, put them together, do that little notch, and then sew all the way down a 1/4 top stitch, and then leave that little gap opening for the cuff. And then obviously we're going to fold in half, sew 1/4, and then you can obviously choose to do the top stitch all the way down, but I'm only going to do it at the top and at the bottom, and then hit the press like we did on the outer shell sleeve. But before you do that, if you come a little bit closer, you can see that obviously we're in 4 parts here with the sleeve. If I move one thing to the side, you can see that obviously that connects up perfectly to make the final sleeve pattern. So the way we're going to construct this is we're going to throw front facings together, and we're going to make sure that we sew this all the way around at a 1/4, and then once it turns the right way up, you can then hit a top stitch all the way along this, and then that will sort of finish our shape. The reason these hem facings are here is just because it gives it a little bit more structure to the actual sleeve itself, and also it gives the button a more structured place to sit on the inside. And finally, you get that little curve stitch on the outside, which we're going to go for. You can sort of see that at the end of the video, but it's that sort of Detroit style sort of like curve hem stitch all the way around the outside of the cuff. Anyway, let's sew them together. Once you've done one side, you're obviously going to do the other. We're going to turn that over front facing, stitch a 1/4, turn it back, hit a top stitch, and then obviously we're just going to construct this the exact same way we did with the outer shell sleeve. So yeah, let's do it. You shouldn't need pins for stuff like this. It should just be able to, pull along. And you should just be able to do the placement with your fingers. Just like that. Now we can kind of turn it inside out the same way we did with the outer ones, and I did the other side of the sleeve off camera, so I have both. I have both of the sleeves on the inside lining, and if you wait there, I also have both of the outer shell sleeves as well. So that is everything for the sleeves. Obviously we have the hem on the inside lining one that we've just sewn to the lining itself. And the way we're going to construct these is when they're both on the final sort of shell of the jackets. Obviously the lining connects to the lining and the outer shell connects to the outer shell. Then we will be putting them inside and sort of sewing them in a certain way which makes them seamless. But for now, we're going to move that to the side, and I'm actually going to sort of focus in on actually starting to construct this jacket together. So if you've watched some of my tutorials before, you'll understand how this works. Obviously right here, we can connect up the side seams and make sure the sort of textured side is facing upwards. And then we're going to throw the front panel so it is good sides facing each other. And we're going to throw a few pins in, and we're going to sew this top shoulder seam, and we're also going to sew down this side seam. This is going to connect up basically the whole back panel to the front panel, and then it's going to leave this sort of open sleeve hole, so then eventually we can attach the sleeves really easily. It's a super easy process. Again, you're literally just flipping your front panel over onto your back panel, and you're sewing across the shoulder and down the side seam, and we're leaving this armhole open. So we're not obviously sewing along the shoulder, and we're not sewing down the sleeve hole. We're just going to sew to the shoulder and then sew down the side seam. Let me show you. And then we're going to do the same for the other side, but I need to just quickly do something to the other side before I do that. And just like that, now you can see that the actual panel is connected, and we've left that hole here, just here, for the arm to connect in. Now what we're going to do is, I'm going to show you this before I actually sew the other one. So we're going to top stitch the shoulder, and basically I like to have my top stitch fold facing the direction of the front panel. This is just mainly for consistency. Now you have this pretty big layer of fabric here, and we've got to sew through this, and obviously it's quite tough to sew through. So I recommend grabbing a hammer or something along the lines of that and just hitting this, and then it's going to press it down a little bit and make it easier to go through your sewing machine. Now that top stitch should be super easy to go through. And then again, we're going to sew the top stitch facing the front way on the side seam too. And we've got the bottom of that pleat that we made on the back. So again, we're going to get the hammer, press that seam down again. We've just got to the stage where we've pretty much just sewn both the front panels to the back, and I think it looks really, really nice. This is such like a sort of fitted jacket. I have gone with quite heavy fabric for my jacket with this sort of military, the stretcher material, but I think it looks really, really nice. The top stitches are a little bit harder for me to get through with that like quadruple layers, and I'm having to hammer it like you just saw. But overall, I'm really, really happy with it. I can flip it over and sort of see the back, which looks really nice. And now we have the two implemented bi-swings in the back, which is really nice. When you're wearing it, you'll really be able to sort of take note on what you've completed and be like, this is sick, because I've never really messed around with this technique either really until we built the pattern. So it's really nice to jump into it. Anyway, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn this actually inside out. So now the whole thing is on the inside out, both sides. And we're going to reintroduce the sleeves, but the outer shell sleeves. And what we're going to do is we're going to just understand something before we move any further. The back of the sleeve is this right here. This is because the added volume has been added into where your sort of elbow would sit. So the added small bit of volume, the reason that them two panels curved was because the added volume is meant for when you're bending your arms, and that sits right in this sort of area right here. The front of the sleeve is obviously left nice and blank, so if I was to put this on, it's obviously not going to fit very well over my hoodie, but it would sit something a little bit like this, and then that's how it would work right there. And then obviously you have your cuff on the back side of the sleeve, just right there, which is really nice. But to be able to construct this into the garment itself, we need to understand which seam connects to what and which sort of direction we're going to implement the sleeve into the armholes. Let me just explain something. Now we've just turned our main body inside out. We understand that the back of the garment is the underneath fabric, and obviously the front of the garment is the front of the jacket. We want to make sure the front facing of the sleeve is being inserted, so the sleeve is not inside out, the sleeve is normal, but the jacket is inside out, and we're going to implement the sleeve with the front facing of the back side towards the back of the jacket, just like that. So if I show you again, let me just explain that one more time. So you've turned your jacket inside out and you now have your back of your jacket facing upwards. So we now know that if we grab the correct sleeve, it won't work if obviously we're grabbing the wrong sleeve, but if we grab the correct one, we'll know it's correct because we can turn it so the right side, the back side, is facing the back of the jacket. And you can sort of implement it into that sleeve hole right there. Then we know that obviously the back of the sleeve right here is, you know, facing the back of the jacket. We're going to match up the bottom seam with the side seam right there. And as I mentioned again, let me pull it out and show you. Obviously the weight and the volume that this sleeve is carrying comes from this seam right here, and then this is going to be on the back. Your cuff is at the bottom of the one with the volume. So we know that this right here is your bottom seam. This bottom seam right here of your sleeve connects to the side seam of your jacket. So if I implement that back in, we'll see that it will naturally start to connect up the bottom seam of the sleeve with the side seam of the jacket. I hope that makes sense. It's pretty much just making sure that your sleeve is the right way round. And we're doing this because obviously the sleeve holds volume in certain areas, and obviously you don't want to sew it wrong with the sort of back small panel being at the front of your sleeves, because obviously that wouldn't work. Now you can throw pins all around this and check that it all matches up perfectly, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to take it to the machine and I'm going to start stitching where them two seams align, where the side seam of the outer shell aligns with the bottom seam of the sleeve. And then just make sure and triple check that the back of your garment has the small sleeve panel and the seam that is being sewn to the side seam isn't the one with your cuff on the end of it. So let's go. So I'm just going to back and forth stitch on that matching seam that we just showed. And then I can now sort of head round this, and it's a bit of an awkward part of the jacket because I've got heavy fabric, but we can sort of work that 1/4 seam all the way around, matching the sleeve to the outer shell, and you can sort of keep pulling it round, making sure you're giving yourself enough space on the machine. And if you've cut everything perfectly and correctly, then obviously it should match up absolutely perfectly. As you can see here, there is no little creases or anything like that. And that is our sleeve sewn into our armhole. And now we can sort of just visually see this by turning this inside out. I'm visually showing you again at the back of the jacket, we have that small sleeve panel. We have the volume on the sort of upper seam up here, and then the cuff at the end of it, and then the bottom seam obviously connects all the way through that side panel sort of seam. Now we can hit a top stitch on this. Now this top stitch can be a little bit confusing. We're just running this top stitch with the fold facing towards the sleeve itself. And as you go round and work your way around this top stitch, you can make sure that all your fabric is out the way underneath. If it's not, you might get like a pocket or something caught under the foot, just like that. So just make sure as you're working your way around this top stitch, you're checking whether all the fabric is out the way, which it should already be, but just being careful, you know, as you're sewing. We're going to work our way around this top stitch. Now I've just turned it inside out, you can now see how clean this is looking with that back pleat, and then obviously on the other side too. Look at that. So that is one of the sleeves implemented, which looks really nice. And I hit that top stitch all the way over it too, which is amazing. And yeah, you've got the cuff ready to go in at the bottom, and it's all looking super nice. Now, off camera, because I wanted to film some of it on my iPhone, I am just going to sew the other sleeve in exactly the same as what I just did with this side. So the other sleeve just goes in the exact same way And then obviously we're just going to sew round and then hit the top stitch on the outside. I've just done the other sleeve and I've top stitched it down. And we're now at a stage where everything's looking a bit, you know, put together, which is really, really nice. And the front looks amazing. I think the whole sort of shape of the jacket is perfect and it's looking really, really, really nice. Just like that, you see all of the sort of contrasting colours, where that sort of khaki feel, you know. And then obviously the back with the pleats, everything looks super, super nice. I'm really, really liking it. I think with that super contrasting collar, like the sort of, you know, the Detroit jackets do have, where it's all built out of that heavy 400 GSM canvas and then it's got a corduroy collar, is kind of the sort of thing that I'm going to go for today, but I'm going to maybe try a different type of fabric. But yeah, the outer shell is pretty much completed now. The next things that we are going to focus on is, I can sort of move this to the side for now. We're going to focus in on the lining itself. And then within this little package in here, we've got the back panel and the bottom facing of the back panel. And then that just is finished for the back panel. Once we sew them together, we can move that with the arms afterwards. And this right here is the lining of the front panel. Now we're going to do a few things to this front panel. We are going to add the center front facing just like that. And this is going to attach to the zip and just give the zip a little bit more sort of structure so it doesn't get caught on the loose threads of the lining. And then we're also going to add down here the bottom hem facing. And then there's one more thing. I spoke about it earlier, but we've got this inside pocket that's going to sort of sit around, probably around the area there, but you can use the sort of the markings on the pattern to mark it out. I don't really think it matters. You can kind of place it wherever you feel comfortable. Maybe you can put it down a little bit for easier access. The way we're going to construct this pocket is it sews to the side with a loose edge, because obviously you're going to be sewing your center front facing in afterwards. And then the bottom and the left side obviously are ironed down, and then you have your 1/2 inch hem allowance on the top to double fold and then do the top stitch. And this will be built out so our front panel pretty much is finished and completed. I'm going to show you how to properly sew it all together. And then we're going to construct the lining just like we've constructed the outer shell. And then we're going to focus on the collar after that. And then after the collar's done, then it's all going to be putting it together. So we're kind of getting close to finishing it, I would say. The lining doesn't usually take that long. And then the collar itself is very simple. It's just sewing 2 pieces of fabric together, turning them inside out, doing a few little techniques and sewing it to the garment. So yeah, let's focus on the front panels first. Then we'll do the back panels. Then we'll sew it all together and then we'll move on. So I have just cut out the inside pocket that I just showed you, the paper one. I did mine a slight bit bigger, and the reason I did that is because I want to place it a little bit lower on my pattern and use it for like universally for just anything that I want to use. You could choose to make this whatever size you want, this inside pocket. It doesn't really make a difference. The way we're going to do this, as I mentioned, we're going to double fold and hem the top of the pocket and then fold the side and the bottom. Then we're going to stitch it in and leave this edge of this pocket raw, because this is going to stitch into the center front facing. But before we do stitch the center front facing on, we're actually going to stitch the bottom hem in so it is the right sort of size. And then when we attach the center facing afterwards, it will all be matched up perfect sizing. So I've got an iron cooking over there, heating up. I'm just going to do the fold of the pocket now. Then you have that double fold on the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this over to the machine and I'm going to stitch and just close up the double fold at the top, the hem, and you don't want to run any stitches down the folds at the moment. We'll do that in a second. So now we have sewn the top hem of the pocket. We can actually put it in the placement that we want, and then with them folds, you just make sure they're in place. If you feel like you need to throw some pins in them, you can do so, but I think I'm just going to go for it, because why not? And then we're just going to stitch all the way around. You can do 2 stitches, so one close to the edge and then another one next to it, but I'm just going to do 1 for the pocket, I think. And then you can close up this pocket on the side just by running a stitch down. But with this stitch that you're going to run down the side of this pocket to close it, just make sure you're doing a really small seam allowance on this. I recommend doing like a really, really small one. Mainly because it just holds it in place, and when we sew the center front facing to it, then it will hide this stitch that we've just made. What I'm going to do now is I am going to sew the bottom hem facing to the front. Front facings again, good size facing each other, and we're going to just sew a 1/4 and sew that together. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew a top stitch along the top of that. And now you can see that this is starting to come together now, and you can also see that when you place your center front facing, it lines up perfectly with the bottom of your front, and it also lines up perfectly with the rest of your neckline right here. So what we're going to do to make it easier, I am going to flip this round and start from the bottom, mainly because we have a right angle right here and we don't want to start from sewing two opposing curves. So yeah, I'm going to start from the bottom and then hit a 1/4 stitch all the way down. Just like that, you've got your center facing integrated also. And now you can do the same where you can hit a top stitch all the way down this just to implement it into the garment properly. That is exactly how you're meant to sew the inside lining together, with the facings on the bottom and the facings on the center front with that integrated lining pocket right there. Now you can sort of choose to go on your own direction with the lining pockets. We obviously provided this one right here, but I sometimes like to do a little welted pocket above that. Also, depending on your color choice, you might have a little bit better sort of clashing of colors. I don't know if I really like the inside of this, but maybe when it's with the garment I'll change my mind. I always encourage you to do your own thing with these patterns. Obviously we provide the blueprints, but these patterns are about you using them as stepping stones to understand the process of making clothes and then going from there. But yeah, I am happy with this. I just don't know about the clashing of colors. Anyway, let's do the same for the other side. So we're going to actually just grab the other front panel. I'm not going to add any pockets to this side. I'm just going to sew the bottom hem on, then sew the front facing on, and then I will actually start constructing this together. We're going to construct it together exactly how we did for the outer shell. I'll briefly show you when we get there, but yeah. So now we're on the back panel. I'm sewing the bottom hem facing to the back panel now. And then hitting a little top stitch on that. So that is everything now, and now the sort of all of the lining pieces are ready to put together. I don't think I'm going to like show you me sewing that, but what I will say is it's the exact same process as what we did with the outer shell. So it's just grabbing the panels, making sure the front facing of the panels, so the good sides are facing each other, and then it's sewing the shoulder and sewing the side seam all the way down. Doing the same for the other side, and then actually implementing them sleeves, but making sure you're implementing the sleeves in the right way. So you're doing it where the sort of small sleeve panel is facing the back. And yeah, we're just sewing this shell together the exact same way we sewed the outer shell. And if you're confused, go back and you should have the exact same panels. I guess the only thing that is different with this lining is that you've got the hems, but the panels are the exact same. So the process is the exact same too. I've just sewn together all of the lining. I've put it over there. As I mentioned, I just did the exact same procedure as what we did to the outer shell to the lining. If you are confused slightly, or I've jumped ahead a little bit too much before you've sewn the lining together, then you can pretty much just reference the last 10 minutes of doing it on the outer shell before we started doing the facings and stuff on the inner lining. So that's done now, and now we're actually at the stage where we're going to start putting stuff together. But before I actually left cutting out my collar, if you already have cut out your collar, then you can kind of skip this bit. But I basically am using the contrast of another piece of fabric. So I'm using this really nice sort of like fabric right here, mixed with the green, and I think it will work really well. The reason I've done this and I'm doing it this way is mainly because on the Detroit jackets, you kind of have that sort of corduroy collar that matches perfectly with the outer shell sort of heavy canvas fabric. So I'm just playing on that idea, and I'm going to do it with this. You cut 2 front facings, and then I'll show you how to sew the collar in a second, and then we will get on to actually implementing it into the final garment, and I'm going to show you how to sew everything. So yeah, let's start. So the way this collar is going to work is we have done it with a curve. Some collars are just normally straight and they don't have too much of a curve, but this one is naturally probably just going to always sit down on your shoulders. The sort of, you know, this inside bit where it says center back reference, that is the inside of your collar, and you can see it's going to sit something like that. I probably just did a bad example, but we know that this is the inside. So we don't want to touch any of this bottom part of the collar, but what we do want to do is we want to sew all the way around the top and then turn it inside out. Now, we normally start the sewing right on the corner, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the sewing around a 1/4 inch up from the corner. So we're going to start our stitch around where this black pin head is there. And then we're going to work our way up to the top, go all the way around this top by sewing it, hit the corner, all the way down, and we're going to stop around a 1/4 inch again there. This is because I'm going to show you a technique to be able to attach the hood to the outer shell and the main fabric in a certain way before we construct everything together. So let me show you on the machine. You can see right there, once I chop the thread, you can see right there I've started like a 1/4 inch from the edge, and this is going to help us down the line. And if you're like me and you've patchworked some of the fabric, then I'm just going to cut some of that excess off a little bit, mainly because it's going to be easier for us to turn inside out. So I have just fixed my little mistake. I sewn all the way down to other side, but now I've left that little gap, that little 1/4 inch gap. So now we have just sewn together all of the sort of side edge all the way along the top edge and then back down the side edge, and we've left that 1/4 inch sort of, you know, gap between the bits of fabric so we can put it onto the garment easier later. Now I'm going to turn it inside out. One thing that's easier for you guys is when you're turning things inside out, especially corners, just trim the edge. And the same with this side. I'll show you on the other side so it's easier to see. Trim the edge of the corner, and then we're going to turn this inside out. Just like that, and then we're going to make sure that we're, you know, you can pinch and roll the edge just on the bit that you've sewn. Pinch and roll all the way around that seam, and it should bring it out, and then you can hit it with an iron afterwards. Now we have turned this inside out. I'm actually going to press it quickly. And once you've pressed it, you can kind of imagine what it will look like as a collar. And we are quickly just going to run a little top stitch all the way around the edge of this. I actually might do one stitch line and then do another one just on top, just to clean it up. So yeah, let's do that. So when you're starting your top stitch, the same as what you did for the inside stitch for the seam, we're just going to start it a little bit higher up, and I'll show you why later, but for now, just follow my lead. Hit a little bit of a back and forth stitch, And you can see that we started that a little bit further up, just to keep that opening right there. And the same when you're on your way back down, just make sure you stop before that edge there. Like I said, you can sort of choose to do another decorative stitch, which is what I'm going to add now to this. But you don't need to, you could leave it at one stitch depending on what you want to do. So, you've just finished your collar, and I just did the little 2 top stitches, and now we're going to focus on actually constructing the jacket itself. And we're going to put it together. I'm going to show you how to do the cuffs. I'm going to show you how to put the collar onto the neckline and then integrate the zip with the last pattern piece after the collar, which is the zip shield. But we can forget about the zip shield for now. Let's just focus on how we're going to sort of connect this lining to the actual outer shell of the jacket first. What we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we got the front facing of the bottom hem of the lining, and we can just put that to the side for now, but make sure it's easily accessible. And we're going to get the same for bottom of the outer shell. So we've got the entire line right here of the bottom hem of the outside shell. We're going to grab the lining and we're basically going to layer that on top, front facings, and you can see that they match up perfectly. So because they match up perfectly, we are just going to run some pins all the way along, but I kind of feel confident enough to not do that. So I think I'm just going to sew a 1/4 seam allowance all the way down. This just connects the bottom of the jacket. The way we're constructing this jacket is we're basically building it from the inside, and then obviously we're going to do the same technique as we do on all the jackets, and that is turn it back outside in. And if we've done it correctly, then it will make a seamless jacket, and that'll be seamless on the inside and outside. There is another alternative option of the way of making this jacket, and that would be you can use the facings, all of the center front facing, the front facing hem, the back hem facing, the sleeve facings, and you could build this jacket without the lining. So if you wanted like another project in the next, I don't know, you wanted to go for another one in the next few days, then you're welcome to literally just not use the lining. It does speed the process up by quite a bit, and because everything has facings on, it still looks clean. I was in a shop the other day and I saw one without, without lining that looked similar, where you'd use the facings and you sew them down. But anyway, we're doing it with lining. I just thought I'd mention that you don't have to use lining on this piece, so you could just put all the lining pattern pieces to the side and not use lining. Anyway, I'm going to sew all the way along this, and then we'll touch bases afterwards. This right here is your center where your zip is going to go. It's quite hard to show, but this is the long panel that I just showed you, which is the bottom hem of the jacket right there. On this sort of section that runs all the way up the jacket, this is the center bit where the zip is going to go. What we want to do at the bottom is we just want to add a little 1/4 inch fold inwards. So inwards on the bottom sort of main panel and upwards on the top. You can measure this and make this perfect, but I think I'm just going to go with that. So on both sides, you've got a little 1/4 inch fold. And the reason we're doing this is because when you turn this outside in and the right way up, and you've sewn all across this bottom hem, then it will already be pre-folded, so your zip can then just be placed into this center front, and it'll start going the right way. If we sew it together with the raw edges touching, then we're going to have to do another fold, and it will make it way more complicated. So we're just pre-folding ready for that zip. So both sides fold out on each other, and then 1/4 seam all the way down. And when you get to the end, we're going to do the same thing on the other side too. So when we get to this end, we're just going to do the exact same thing where we're folding over and folding over the other side too and connecting it up, just like we did at the start. And this just gets our center front ready and folded the right way so our zip can be implemented later easily. So now we have done that little 1/4 stitch to close that bottom hem up. So as you can see here, we ironed this seam open. The reason we did that is so there's equal bulk on each side, and it won't be like a huge like ironing mess when you get to ironing the final piece and doing the top stitching and all that sort of thing. And obviously this is the lining that's going to be integrated into the garment itself. But before we actually integrate it in, we're going to focus on the actual collar itself, and we're going to stitch the collar to the top of the outer shell neckline, just like this. And then we are going to stitch that same collar. Whilst it's already stitched on the outer shell, we're going to stitch it to the top of the neckline on the inside too. And this is basically just going to mean that, again, we're building it inside out, and then we can turn it the right way. Yeah, let's start. Basically what you want to do to start is you want to get your collar, and obviously, as you know, we left that little gap, and the side you want facing up and the part you actually want to be the collar showing, so the side that faces the sky, you want to basically put it in the right sort of correct way so it faces up. And the bit that we're going to be sewing is we're going to be doing the fold on that center front. So if you view this at the bottom, you see we've already made that natural fold on the bottom of the center front on the hem. You can basically follow that sort of fold all the way up, and we can make it at the top too, just like this. And when this whole garment is constructed and it's put together, then obviously it's going to be super simple for you to implement your zip, because it will naturally be folding the right way. So we want to get the side we want to stitch. We know we've already done the fold on the actual collar itself, and we're just going to match the fold up that we just made there. Again, you want it to sort of be like 1/4 of an inch. And then what we're going to do is we're going to sew around just the bottom panel of the collar. We're going to sew all the way round and then get to the end. And then we're going to do the same on the other side, where we do the fold and it matches that sort of opening there. I'm going to show you on the sewing machine, but we're basically just sewing the underneath of the collar, front facing to the outer shell is what we're doing right now. So again, at the top, neckline, center front, we're just adding that little 1/4 inch fold, and we're going to match that with the actual bottom of the collar. I've got this fraying fabric which isn't really that great, but I should be able to do a little back and forth stitch on it, and it should hold. Maybe I can fold it in a little bit more. And yeah, like I said, 1/4 seam all the way around, but just on the bottom panel, you can see the top panel here of your collar is left untouched. So visually showing you now we've done it, you can see that this is actually stitching the bottom part of the collar to obviously the correct part of your outer shell neckline. And I'm just going to follow this along, and it should all match up. You can actually follow the notches and use the center part of your neckline and match that up with the center part of the marking notch for your collar. But I'm actually not going to do that because I have trust that the pattern is going to match up perfectly, and I don't really need them alignment lines. So let's go. So right there you can see I'm doing that 1/4 inch fold just to match up both the edges there so they're flush. And then I'm just going to sew through that. Just like that. Now, whilst you're here, I recommend, you can see the collar functionally works. We're going to grab the neckline of the lining and pull it up, and we're going to hold the collar. Now what we're doing, I might as well show you here and do it straight away. We're now connecting the top part of the collar because it's left open, and you can see we've got that gap. We can actually sew this top part of the collar now to the inside of the lining. So again, you want to do that sort of 1/4 inch fold and then connect that. And then we're doing the exact same procedure where we're following it round, but just sewing the top of the collar to the inside lining. So you might encounter this problem right here, and I've just encountered this problem right here too. Basically, the lining fabric is a little bit more elasticated than the actual 400 GSM heavy canvas that I'm using on top. So when I'm sewing through this, obviously the lining pulls a little bit more. What I like to do, Obviously I've sewn across this. If you were just sewing the same fabric and it had no stretch on one of them and they were both the same consistency of fabric, this would match up perfectly as the one did on this side. However, this side, because this fabric is elasticated, it sort of pulls a little bit and now we're left with this excess bit of fabric. What I like to do is measure the middle point between this seam right here and this seam right here, or you can just do it by eye. And then I basically, because this is the lining, it won't really make too much difference to the final pattern because it's only by like a few inches. I like to just pinch and then fold. And this sort of in the middle of our back part of our lining just creates a tiny little pleat. And then you can just sew this together. I don't, you know, maybe unpick and do it again, but the main reason I'm suggesting to do it this way is because you've just seen what I've done, and it's mainly because of the pull on the more elasticated fabric underneath. But you can just sort of run a pleat and make it intentional, you know. So now we've just sewn the collar into the top, and we've sewn the hem down, and you have these floppy arms that are ready to be put in the right place. What we're going to do is we're actually just going to turn this to the side and we're going to pull everything out, and it's going to go the right way up. So everything comes through, turning it the right way up. It's a bit of a job, to be honest, but there we are. And now you want to grab from the inside, you want to grab your lining sleeves, and we're just going to sort of put them in place so they're down the right sleeve, the correct sleeve. And the same with the other side, this one's hanging out. You can see here, we're just going to pull it in and then put it down the sleeve. You can sort of pull that and it all starts making sense and matching up a little bit more, which is nice. What we're going to do is we're going to just pull them sleeves to the very end. We can see that it all matches up. You see that it's all ready to be sewn properly together. I'm going to show you how to connect all these cuffs, and then we'll put a button in there afterwards. I'm actually just going to quickly try it on for size reference. Just make sure this sleeve is set correctly down here too. We can kind of pull it and it makes the lining sort of sit nicely too. But there we go. I'm going to try this on and then we'll get back to construction. I would actually recommend trying it on at this point in time because it makes the final garment actually, like the garment at its current stage, it feels so much more natural when it's on. It might look a bit sort of square and rugged on the table, but this is actually insane and I am very happy with this. The sizing of the large is like almost a perfect fit for me. Very happy with it. So I'm going to show you how to seamlessly do the cuffs. There's a little technique I'm going to show you. Now they're through and you can see all the loose edges. We'll put a button on and then it's just connecting the zip. But I think I'm going to tackle the connection of the zip first, then the cuffs, and then just any loose edges that we feel like we need to clean up. Do the little stitching around the bottom hem, especially around the cuffs, and then the whole jacket will be finished. So let's do that. To be able to start implementing the zip, we've got our zip cover. This panel gets folded in half and we're just going to stitch all along the top of this, and then we're going to turn it inside out, and we're going to do the same with the other side. So stitch along both of the shorter edges, just like that. Stitch along them ones, and you obviously don't need to stitch down this long edge, and then we just turn it inside out, and then we hit a top stitch all around it, and that'll be our zip cover that gets implemented on the inside of the zip. So let me show you how to just construct this first, and then we'll implement our zipper. I've got a really nice reproduction talon zipper here, and I just cut a little bit of that fabric out as the zip puller, but this zip's a tiny bit too long, so I'm gonna have to trim it down, but we'll show you that in a minute. Now what we want to do is we can actually hit this with an iron and iron this down, and then we're going to run a top stitch all the way around this, and then we're also going to stitch this sort of closed, this area closed too. Just like that, we have stitched the zipper cover. I normally do the top stitch a little bit further in for the zipper cover because I think it looks a bit cleaner, especially on the zip cover. But yeah, let's implement the zip to this. So now we're going to implement the zipper. I don't really like the zipper cover going all the way down to the bottom of the zip, so I I like to leave a few inches between the zipper and the zip cover, and I also slightly cut my zipper cover a tiny bit shorter so it leaves a little bit of excess up here too. And I'm going to have to trim my zipper down by like a few teeth for it to be able to fit in this jacket regardless, because I never am planned with these tutorials and I never have the right size zip. So I'm going to pull this to the machine, and with a zipper foot, actually with a normal foot, I recommend we're going to just sew all along this, but sew it so the sort of like loose end connects up to the zipper. And you can choose which side you want to do this for. You could turn this zip round and do it the other side. I think I'm going to do it this side. Leave a few inches and then we will stitch it. And just like that, that is the zip cover actually implemented into the zip. Now what we want to do is we actually want to zip off one side of the zip. We want to just remove it completely, and we're left with this right here. And let me show you how to implement and sort of stitch this to the garment itself. We want to sew this literally right in between these two panels right here. So obviously the center front where you've started to make that sort of fold, we want to sew this zipper directly into this fold that we've started here. The way that we're going to do this to make it super easy for you is we're actually going to go and get the lining, the sort of like facing, the lining facing, and we're going to sew the back sides together of the zip with the zip cover attached. We're going to sew them together with the back sides facing. So obviously the zip is facing me now and the lining is facing me. So the good side of the lining, and then we get the bad side of the zip, and they're facing each other. Maybe we can visually show you from directly above. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch all the way up this. So just for confirmation again, this is your facing, your inside lining facing, and then the zip is facing up. So it's the back side of the zip, which is facing the good side of the lining. And we're going to stitch all the way across this, all the way up this. And what this is doing is it means that when we naturally fold it the right way that it wants to go afterwards, let me show you in a second. So now, once this starts folding the natural way that it wants to sit, you can see that it's now sort of seamlessly added the zip. And then what we're going to do is, you've obviously naturally made that fold on the other side too. I keep saying naturally in this tutorial. We can follow that fold all the way up, and we can throw pins. And as you can see, it will sit there. When we stitch and top stitch this fold that we've just made, it will actually sew into the back side of this. And this is just cleaning up our whole zip. But that needs to happen along the whole zip, all the way up to the top. And I've got a bit of a longer zip, but I'm just going to tuck it in to this right here. I'm not pinning it, but you guys can. This fabric is way too heavy for me to pin, so I'm just going to pull and sort of stitch as I go. So you want to make sure that you're pulling your lining whilst doing this if you haven't pinned. But the sort of aim of what we're doing right now is this fold, this 1/4 inch fold that we're making all the way down needs to sit on top of this stitch that you've just made. Sort of so it overlaps it so you can't see the stitch. And then you know that the back end of the stitch that you're currently making is going to sit on the right sort of part of the garment on the inside. I've done, which if you're having to do the same thing as me, I'm assuming that you've you know, gone out and bought the right size zip for this project, but mine is a little bit longer, so I've tucked it in. And what I'm going to do to finish this, whether you've got the right size zip or not, I'm going to make a stitch starting from the collar, and it's going to run from the seam that we just made up here, one of the top stitches, and then it's going to run all the way onto this and then connect to the stitch that I started making right here. I'm going to just clean that up by getting rid of that. Start on the collar, make your way through. So it should now look something a little bit like this, where your zip is fully working on one side of the tape. And we've got, you know, our zip guard, our zip shield working. And then on the inside, if you followed it with the fold going over the stitch you've just done, so it sort of covers it up and then you're stitching over the right sort of thing, then it will match up perfectly on the other side, just like that, which is really nice. And that is one side of the zipper completed, which I am actually very, very happy with. What we're going to do now is we are actually going to do the exact same thing to the other side, but just with the other side of the zip. Obviously we're not adding a zipper shield on this now, but we've got one side of the zip left. So what you want to do is match it up from the bottom of the garment. I know I overlapped that accidentally at the bottom. So we'll do the same over here, because otherwise it'll mess up. Just like that. And we sort of want to match up the placement of this zipper. I'm going to do this by eye, but I did this last time and kind of went wrong, but we're going to do it again. Basically, now that's matched up, we can actually fold out the lining, and we're going to stitch this zip the same with the back facing of the zip, but it doesn't really matter now because both sides of the zip are the same. We're going to run that all the way along the lining on the inside, if you can see the inside, and then we're going to stitch that all the way down, and when it turns out the right way, then we can do the same thing for the outside. So, I have just sewn in the zip. I did exactly what I said there, where I basically just did the exact same procedure with just the zip itself and not just the zip and the zip shield. But I'm going to leave it here again today. It'll be a click of a fingers and then it'll be the next day for you. But I'm going to enjoy my Friday evening. Max has just turned up. Eloise has been here the whole time. But yeah, I'm going to stop now and we'll carry on tomorrow. All I need to do is show you how to do the cuffs and then just top stitching all of the inside hem facings. And then it'll be finished. So we're going to leave it there and I'll see you tomorrow. Ow. So, final day of construction. Today we are going to actually redo the zip that we did yesterday. So I did start the zip, but because my fabric is so heavy, I actually thought it was better to sort of undo what I did and then show you a different method if you have used really heavy canvas. And then there is a choice of a few methods you can choose from. I actually trimmed down a new zip to the exact length which you're gonna need, which is approximately 22 inches. And it will say in the pattern, so luckily you'll have the right stuff before you start this project. But yeah, 22 inches on the zip, and I'm showing you a new technique right now. This is the last step of the stage before we get to the cuffs and then fully finish the jacket. And then I'm moving on to another tutorial after, which probably will come out before this. But anyway, last day of construction. I hope you're enjoying this walkthrough. I hope you've used a little bit more lighter fabric than I have, because as much as I love this piece and I think the pattern is incredible, this is only one way of showing the pattern because of how heavy the fabric is. So I'm going to make another version of this on the trip that I'm going on and make it a little bit better. But yeah, let's get into the tutorial. Let's quickly do the zip, and you can follow what I do, attaching it to the zipper shield and then implementing it into the fabric itself. And then we'll move on to the cuffs. The cuffs should be really easy. It's just a lot of pinning and ironing. And then we're literally finished. We're going to implement a little button and then we're done. So yeah, let's get into it. So we've got our zip here and we've got our zip shield. You can see that I've actually unpinned all the stitching, and because this is too heavy, it actually marks the fabric, but it shouldn't make a difference. What we're going to do is we're going to get the left part of this tape and we're just going to overlay it over the side, which is the raw edge right there. So overlay the zip, and then we're going to run a stitch all the way down this zip right here. I've actually chosen to sort of like make my zipper cover a tiny bit shorter. That is mainly because I don't really like it too much when it goes the full length from bottom to top, because it just makes it a bit too rigid. So what I'm going to do is I'm just, like I said, I'm going to stitch the zipper onto the raw edge. And you can choose which side you want this to be by obviously flipping this over and then putting it on so it connects this side, or you can flip it over and connect it the other side. So I think I'm going to go for this side. Now you have stitched the zip onto the actual cover itself, I'm just going to trim the loose threads, and we're going to actually take the zipper off of the tape. So you've got one side which is, you know, just the normal zipper, and this can be sort of put to the side for now, and then you've got the other side of the tape which has the puller on right here. And we're going to implement this into the garment now. So we've got our zip and our zipper shield, and a way to do this, so there's a multiple different techniques you can do to implement this zip in sort of like, you know, if you have a different technique, then feel free to go and do it. One of the techniques is that you can get the back side of this zipper shield and you can place it right up against the inside center front facing, sew it together to just this center front facing, and then when it flips over, then you can actually run the pins and fold that outer shell fabric over the zip and then stitch it all the way up. I did this yesterday, and I'm not showing you that because I got a little bit frustrated with it because of how heavy this fabric is. So I'm doing it a different way. You can see that I've thrown pins all the way in that center front facing here. And the way I'm going to show you is, as you did earlier, you know that down here we've got a little fold which naturally runs and sort of all the way up here. And then there's another fold right up here by the collar sort of neckline. And that will mean that naturally both the center front facing and the outer shell fabric will want to be folded in because it will follow the same sort of consistency as the folds that you've made at the top and the bottom. Essentially, what I did is I followed that fold and just pinned it in place. And now I'm going to basically work my way up this and just slot it in, take a pin out, slot it in, replace the pin all the way up this piece. And if you feel confident enough, you could just sort of take the pins out as you go and then sew it in place. I might actually do that. But we're basically just making that fold and we're just implementing that zipper into the right place now. So I'm doing this manually like this because of how heavy my fabric is. Usually I would sew the back side of the zipper shield to the center front facing, and then I'd fold it over and then just run a little top stitch up it. But because the fabric's so heavy, it didn't want to do that yesterday. So we're doing something different. Again, you've got your zipper shield and your zip sewn together, and you're just going to place it, if I move the puller out the way, you're just going to place it in the right sort of place that you want to stitch it, and then, you know, add a pin back in that right there. As I mentioned, I've trimmed this zip so it fits perfectly, but that right there is the right placement, and we just sew along that and then work our way up the garment. So I'm going to start stitching from where the zipper shield is. That looks good.
That's really good.
And so with the other side, what I'm doing here is I'm actually just pinning the zip in again. I'd say this is quite like a base level way to do it. There is loads of other techniques, and you can follow one of my other tutorials where I like implement zips really fast and like show you cool techniques. But I think this way, as I've mentioned, it's more of like situational thing because of how heavy the fabric is. But just lining up this zip and making it so it doesn't like go in and look like this, and you know, it's just very situational that I'm doing it this way. But I recommend, if you're using heavy fabric, probably copy me. If not, and if you want to try it a different way, you can check out the Aero Jacket rough cut that me and Gio made in Italy. I'll put a little overlay over the video, like right here. You can head to that video and watch how I implement the zip with Gio, because it's quite a fun little process. And what I'm going to do on this side here, whilst I'm getting closer to the bottom, is underneath the sort of bottom hem of the jacket, what I've done instead of ironing is I've just sort of put the placement of the pins in the right place so it holds the structure of this little fold. And what we did earlier was we sort of ironed the middle seam between the outer shell and the lining when we put the sort of sewed the bottom hem together. So it'll naturally sort of like, you know, it'll naturally have this fold. And if you're using less heavier fabric again, then it will be easier for you to run this top stitch. So what I'm basically doing now is I'm going to get to the bottom of the zip, and then I'm going to run a stitch all the way along the bottom, carrying on all the way around the bottom hem of the jacket. So I'll show you now. do a little back and forth stitch on the bottom. And then we're going to follow this round, keep the needle in the machine. Then we're actually going to follow this round all the way around the jacket. Any bits that are a little bit heavier and sort of bulkier, you can sort of grab the hammer. We're going to walk our way around this. So right there, you can see that we have just now fully implemented the zipper. Let me just get the jacket looking nice. So, now we're moving on to the final part of the tutorial, and that is just cleaning up this area right here. There might be, again, another way that you know to do this, but I'm just going to show you the just sort of manual way with sort of folding, pinning, and just connecting the inside lining of the cuff with the outside shell of the cuff. The way I'm going to do this is, as you can see, where we sort of stopped the stitching on the outside shell, we made that little notch and we sewn only to the notch. It's naturally flowing a fold just like that, and it's doing the same on the inside. So what we're going to do is we're just going to grab the inside, make sure it like sort of lines up all the way to the top of the piece, so the lining and the outside of the fabric matches up perfectly, and we're actually just going to fold and do the same for the outside, give it a little fold, and then we're going to match it and do it all the way up and just throw pins in and then make sure that fold is nice and even. Just like that. So now you can see that the panels now match up with that fold. You can also equally iron this. It's just in a bit of an awkward sort of spot for you to iron. So now I'm going to do the other side, and then we're going to sort of sew it to near the end, and then we're actually going to just fold all around the top of the cuff also. And yeah, it should be nice and easy. So what I'm doing is I'm just pinning around this now, and I'm making sure I'm pinning the fold on the top. As you can see there on that opening, these are pinned together now, and I'm following it all the way around the hem of the sleeve. I'm going to go all the way around. I've got this last bit to do. One thing that I just wanted to mention, so if you do have a bit of like bunching up like this, I'm just sort of going to get some tweezers in a minute whilst I'm sewing and just, shove it in that little gap. What I'm going to do here is I'm actually just going to do a little back and forth tack stitch to close this up. And once we've finished on attaching this cuff, it should overlap just like this. I'm going to put my little buttonhole on the top here, and then it creates this really nice volume at the bottom of the sleeve. And you can obviously choose to wear it with or without this. But yeah, I think it'll look really nice because it kind of overlaps perfectly. There is multiple ways of doing cuffs. We're at the end of the tutorial, and I don't want to blame it on this being such heavy fabric, but it does make techniques a little bit harder to sort of like achieve. So I'm just going to get to sewing this, finishing the little pinning and folding. I'm going to do the same with the other side, and then we're going to go over to the machine, stitch it, and then I'll show you how to implement the buttonholes before we have a finished garment. So let's do it. It's not that hard of a process. Equally, if you have fabric which is quite malleable, I'd probably get the iron out at this point. And if you have something like a tailor's ham, that's also really helpful for being able to sort of, iron parts of the garment which you can't normally get to and you can't really lay flat. So yeah.
Half the sentence out.
So this is what I meant with like the bunching up. I've kind of cleaned it up there. When this button is implemented on, it will obviously overlap, which will be really, really nice. What I'm going to do now is, as you can see with a curve on the inside of the facing, I'm actually going to follow a stitch all the way around this curve, and it will just make that really nice sort of decorative stitch all the way around. So yeah, let's give that a go. And we're just following that stitch that we had on the inside, again, as you can see, it's just there's a stitch all the way along. We're just following right on top of that. And right there, you can just see that created that super nice decorative stitch all the way around. And on the inside, it's just sort of, you know, structured that so it stays in place, that sort of inside hem facing, which is really nice. Now, as I mentioned, I've got a little bit of an issue up here, and that is mainly due to the bulk of the fabric. But what you can do to clean that up a little bit is just hit a little top stitch or a little sort of notch over this just to clean it up, which I'm going to do right there, and then we'll be ready. Obviously one side overlaps the other. With the buttonhole implemented, it'll be super clean. So let's do that. So that little tack that I did just closed up what we were doing here. You can actually do that with hand stitching, I've just sort of noticed, and you can actually match it up with this stitch up here. Maybe that's a little sort of flaw of my garment now, but on the next side of the cuff, which is nice because you get to go again, because obviously you've got 2 of these to go. I'm actually going to do it out of sashiko and just clean this little bit up right here.
Rolling.
So we've now finished. I just did the little sashiko technique to close up this bottom of the cuff right there. And on both sides, it should be symmetrical. So you should have your bigger sleeve panel that overlines and sort of overlap onto your smaller sleeve panel right there. And what I'm going to do, I really like the look of this. I've got these buttons right here, and they have like a little pin with 2 sort of pins on it. Like the bottom part of the button is like, looks something like this. And then the top part of the button looks something like this, and I really like them. They're like these washed, sort of weathered looking buttons, and I'm going to show you how to implement them, or how I implement them. And I'm going to do a little buttonhole, but the buttonhole that I'm making is going to be via my industrial machine. So we're going to make it really quickly. I've got my little box of tools. I've got this little plate which I like to put under the fabric so it doesn't, you know, smash up the table, because as you can tell, I've smashed up the table quite a lot. And I am just going to implement and set the button in the correct area. I'm going to just do it by eye, and let's just say right there. So the way I'm going to set this is I just put that little pin through the fabric, and I just like to hold this little pin hammer in place on top of the actual button itself, and you can actually just lightly tap it, which sets the button. And then I'll just use this little tool here and the smaller hammer, or maybe I'll use the bigger hammer for this. And now that button is set in place and is not going anywhere, which is really nice. Now this is going to overlap, and I'm going to make my buttonhole. Buttonhole will be like here. I'm basically just going to mark out this buttonhole by finding where this button ends. So one there, this side is like there. I'm going to run this buttonhole just like that. The way I'm going to sew this buttonhole is I'm literally just going to follow this sort of guide on my industrial machine and do a bit of a back and forth stitch, and then I'm just going to cut it open, and then that button should perfectly implement in there. Let me show you. It's super easy. This is like the most easiest buttonhole you can make. I would be using the buttonhole setting on my domestic machine, or hand sashikoing a sort of really cool buttonhole, but at this point with this heavy fabric, I'm not messing around with anything else. I want to get this jacket finished. I'm excited to finish it and try it on. Just now cutting open the hole in the middle of the button. Obviously you can go a bit more precise with this. I might re-go over the stitches in a minute. But right there we've got our little buttonhole, just like that. And obviously you can go a little bit cleaner with this. You can choose to do the buttonhole via your domestic machine. But I think with the rugged sort of look with this jacket and the heavy fabric, leave it just like that. And I'm going to do the same for the other side and implement the button and sort of, you know, have it working. And then we've pretty much got a finished garment, and I'm excited to showcase it on and show you what it looks like. And here we have it. This is the finished yard jacket pattern. And you know what? now I've finished it, done the cuffs, put the buttons in, I am actually really happy with it. I kind of doubted it because of the heavy fabric, and then I tried it on. I got some iPhone clips for Instagram and they look really, like it looks really good on the body. I think I'm going to play with this pattern quite a few times after this, and just, I'm going on a trip, so I'm definitely going to do the trip garment construction using this pattern. But overall, I'm really happy with it, and I hope that you've got to the stage where you finish yours and you're really happy with yours. As far as this one in front of me, I literally love the shape of the sleeves. They are so nice, that sort of like perfect shape that comes in, and then when you flip them over you can sort of see that perfect sort of overlap with the button. That worked really nice. Yeah, I love that little bi-swing in the back. If I flip it over, you can see that it functions there, and I tried it on and you can sort of, there might be an overlay right now that shows me sort of using the bi-swing, which is really cool. The overall shape, the fact that this was literally a military stretcher turned into a jacket that fully functions. Now I've completed it, even though it was stressful with the heavy fabric, I genuinely think this is actually a really cool project. I don't really do much reworking at the moment. It was actually obviously the base level of how Roughcut started, with the denim jackets and the sashiko work with the patchwork and things like that. But I've sort of taken a bit of a step back from it. I do it now and again with the patchwork denim and the canvas because I love it. But as far as stuff like this, I don't really do this anymore. So it is a bit of an interesting sort of process. But this has been a really long tutorial, so I'm not going to keep you for longer. The pattern is available on the website. You can purchase this individually for $15.95, or you can purchase the workwear bundle, which is all 5 workwear patterns. You have the field apron, the yard jacket, which we've just made, the yard carpenters, the service coveralls, and the service dungarees. And them 5 patterns make the workwear series. You can buy them as a bundle on the website, and it is slightly cheaper. But yeah, I'm overall really happy with this. I really hope that you got the knowledge. There was some slightly hard parts for me to explain to you, but I think I'm going to do another tutorial after this. I think I probably will. You can check them out as an overlay here, or if they're not done yet, check the description, because on the description there will be links to go and watch the other ones. Anyway, thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking with me. Thank you to Eloise for filming, because it's been a great process and she stuck with it too. It was quite a long process. We did it in 3 days. But yeah, go grab the pattern, and I'm excited to see your builds. I'll catch you in the next video. Goodbye.